It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. Unlike Chuck, my parents weren't themselves refugees, but their ancestors were. And my father's ancestors were those bizarre people that were called loyalists. And they were brought across the river by the Mohawk, Rogers Rangers, those guys. And they thought that the 3/5 rule, you know what that is? That's the idea that a black man is 3/5 of a human. It's in the American Constitution, the part they don't talk about. The protection of slavery, the part they don't talk about. And Canada was formed in part by a bunch of refugees, as my grandfather said, blame it on Mansfield. Now Mansfield isn't just a neat little place on the way north out of Brampton. Mansfield was Lord Mansfield, who in a little case called Somerset's case, the first intolerable act that led to the American Civil War, finished off with the line, "The black must go free." That slavery is odious, that it is without moral or legal foundation. That was in the 1770s. The American Revolution, on one level, was a war to save slavery. Shh, don't let anyone know. And the loyalists who came up here had their first act from a fellow by the name of Colonel Simcoe. Colonel Simcoe's first act was an act to abolish slavery. And there was a little song that you may have heard some of the words of and not quite had them ring where they came from. The true North strong and free. The Underground Railroad song went something along the lines of follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd that leads us north to freedom. Canada was the free country in North America. It was also one of the first countries on earth that had full emancipation on the basis of religion. Right here, in this funny little place called Upper Canada. Some years later, First World War comes along, then the Second World War, and there's a little bit of history around us tonight. Patrick, your speech reminds me of my late godfather, a guy by the name of John Pallet, who was chief whip and parliamentary secretary to a guy called John George Diefenbaker. John Pallet and John George Diefenbaker, with the Pallet kids and the Legge kids running around causing trouble, were ensconced in the Pallet dining room with my old man, God bless his soul, and they wrote something called the Canadian Bill of Rights. The first Canadian Bill of Rights was a conservative document. And one of the little facts buried in the background that no historian's ever going to write about is what driving his tank into Bergen-Belsen, which was a death camp, did to my Uncle John. He'd been in action for 2 years. Nothing had prepared him for that. My dad was the official historian. A fellow by the name of Rabbi David Monson did the purification rituals. They never got over it. Bunch of crazy Canucks. What were they doing over in Europe in 1940s? What was our piece in that fight? What was our empire? A bunch of farmers and shopkeepers. What are they doing over there, dying by the tens of thousands? The war's over, and the first major human rights case in Canada came up into the Ontario Supreme Court in front of Keeler Mackay. That's an odd name. It's Gaelic. And Keeler Mackay was a Nova Scotia boy who had been left for dead 3 times in the First World War. He had no business being alive. Full of shrapnel, all blown to bits. Much like Brian Dixon, later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, who was a war amputee. He'd been left for dead on the battlefield too. Keeler Mackay said that discrimination on the basis of race, creed, color, or religion is treason. To set one class of His Majesty's subjects against another on the basis of race, creed, color, or religion is treason. It's wrong. That's not what we fought and died in the wars for. What do you think of those words? Well, the Supreme Court of Canada said Mackay was wrong. Shh, don't let anyone know that occasionally there are dinosaurs on the court. And the Premier of Ontario was a Tory by the name of Frost, Colonel Frost. And Colonel Frost, a member of this club and of the Royal Canadian Military Institute, camped out on the second floor below us, said, Mackay's right. John Diefenbaker, John Pallet in Ottawa said, Mackay's right. The dinosaurs are wrong. We're all in this together. And when I was a kid, there was a line that we heard from Dad and The Godfather. I say that in a good way, more than a few times, by a Lutheran pastor who was a Prussian. Ended his life in a death camp. When they came for the Jews, I did nothing, for I wasn't a Jew. When they came for the trade unionists, I did nothing. I wasn't a trade unionist. When they came for the communists, I did nothing. I wasn't a communist, didn't even like them. When they came for me, there was no one left. The fact of the matter is that human rights are not divisible. If we have freedom of religion for non-Anglican Protestants, do we have freedom of religion for Catholics, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims? And the answer is yes, we do. If we have freedom from arbitrary arrest and torture, do we have that for Sheriff Jarvis, or do we have it for everyone? What you heard tonight from Patrick was a classic and beautiful example of the Canadian political tradition at its finest. We're all in this together. And those who slaughter and torture and abuse their fellow human beings are wrong. And what they are doing is criminal. And we shouldn't dress it up. We shouldn't excuse it. It was indeed John Diefenbaker who spoke out against apartheid, the only Prime Minister in the Commonwealth to make it an issue. And that's why my grade 8 history teacher, the greatest teacher in my life, had been a black South African professor at Cape Town University. God bless the late Dr. Davids. Canada has received incredible immigrants because of abuse and torture and genocide and ethnic cleansing. Today, we have Dr. Chandrakanthan, the chief bioethicist at St. Michael's Hospital, who does extraordinary life and death, ethical guidance and decision-making in one of the busiest teaching hospitals on earth. Thank you, Sri Lanka. And what does that mean for all of us? We must never forget. And Canada is a changing mosaic. I'm an old man. Chuck's an old man. How many years have we got left? Fact of the matter is, to you from failing hands we throw. The next generation is in this room. The question is, how are you going to, and your children and your grandchildren, how are they going to treat each other? Not just in Canada, but is Canada going to continue to be a voice for human rights, decency, tolerance, and caring? Let's hope.